Hi everyone, thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning. I'm a bit hoarse, I'm a bit tired, actually I'm very tired. So we actually have a very important topic today, and perhaps I should have left it until I was a little bit more rested, but I think it's an important topic to discuss, not only because of course in the United States they've got a very important election coming up. Thank you very much, Carter. Oh, shut up, Tim. But because everywhere in the world we are having to endure a whole different regime of news consumption than we were used to 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And a lot of you would recall the way we got news, say, 40 or 50 years ago. And I want to hark back to that as well and compare that to what we have today. It's an important topic, and it's one that sometimes we just gloss over. We just go to our favourite news source, we read it, we get excited, we repost things, and then we forget about it. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of critical thinking. Where did this news come from? Who wrote it? Is it a reputable news company? Now, of course, there's also a whole new flurry of independent news channels. And some people say, well, you can't trust mainstream media anymore, as they call them, just MSM, mainstream media. And I would like to know from the people that don't trust mainstream media, where do you get your news? So there's no right or wrong answers today. I mean, I suppose I'm going to come from and I use the term generally, not politically. I come from a generally conservative point of view when it comes to the creation and the dissemination of media. As I said, I use the word conservative in its true meaning, not regarding politics. So I think it's a worthy thing to discuss, and I know it gets a lot of people sort of hot under the collar. And some of my points of view, if I express them freely, would get a lot of you upset about where I think a lot of poor, bad, even dangerous media is coming from these days. So I asked people in the comments section, and hello to everybody, where do you get your news? Name your 3 top news sources. So I invite you all to have a go at that. Name the 3 places you get your news every day. As I said, there's no right and wrong answers. If you say sort of Fox News and Newsmax, man, I don't care. I'm just interested to know. So let's name our 3 top news sources. I've got my top news sources I'm going to name. And it's telling me I can now tune to Tim Newton. He's doing a live program. Can you trust the news? Oh, I think I'll click on that. So hello to everybody. We've got people all over the place, and I don't really want to spend the next 10 minutes just sort of reading out who you all are and where you're from, but literally from around the world. Georgia, USA, St. Christopher. Grandpa Roy says NPR and PBS in the United States. And we're not just talking about the United States. Maybe, and I might be saying this unfairly, people in the United States that think the only news sources in the world are in the United States. I've got some bad news for you. News comes from around the world in all sorts of different news sources. By the way, why am I a bit bleary this morning? It's because we had the final night of the vegetarian festival here in Thailand and also in Phuket. Anywhere in the country that's got a strong Thai Chinese cultural ethnicity and background, they celebrate this Chinese New Year. So Chinatown in Bangkok, of course, but more so down here in the south, a place like Phuket, which has a very strong Thai Chinese cultural background. And around this area, which had a strong background in tin mining, where a lot of the Chinese came to work as labourers. They stayed, they married the locals, and we've now got this Thai Chinese community and their heritage, which involves this 10 days every year of complete mayhem. And if I'll grab Pla, the owner of Chip Fair Lele, where I am this morning, I'll grab Pla and say, tell me what the vegetarian festival's about. You could grab 10 people, they won't give you the same answer. It's a very interesting. I'll talk about that a bit later because I do want to get into the main topic. I know that's why you're here. NPR, National Public, I don't know, PBS, Public Broadcasting. This program is brought to you. I've watched quite a lot of PBS over the years. Good morning from Hua Hin. There's a lot of air pollution in Nonthaburi, says Scarface. Antoine, good morning from Bang San in Chonburi. Good topic, he says. Good morning from sunny Kanom. So, yeah, I'm asking people what their sources are. Dorothy Ruby Red Munchkin says BBC. Now, of course, there is going to be, if you're coming from the UK, you're more likely to say the BBC than, say, USA Today. So Radu Justa, he says BBC and CNN. Now, I'll get onto CNN a little bit later. That is one of those news sources that does tend to get a lot of people hot under the collar. I think wrongly a lot of the time. Stephen opines, journalists have to make a story to get paid. Back in the early 20th century, there was a newspaper in England with the headline declared that there was no news today. Yes, yeah. At the end of the day, newspapers, news sources generally are businesses. And sometimes they will put things on the front page, or they'll post things, using the common parlance, that are not necessarily important news or hot news or vital news, but they know it will sell newspapers, get clicks, etc. So I'm just waiting for Pla to come back. Gunnar Hopstead, now Gunnar, you're being a little bit naughty here, says BBC, CNN, Tim Newton. Okay, Swedish TV, says Ingvar, NBC, and Joe Blogs at YouTube. Is Joe Blogs actually a real thing? Joe Blogs is sort of the name you used to use when you didn't have a name or you'd forgotten the name. Is Joe Blogs at YouTube, or are you just talking about generally you use Tube as a news source? And that would be a perfectly good answer. In fact, increasingly, I probably use YouTube as a general news source rather than going to publications as I used to in the past. Andrew Lloyd, he says, hello Tim from Patum Thani, just north of Bangkok. Apla, sawadee kap, come and talk to me. I have a question for you. Hello to everyone. There's only 6,000 people there. Owner of Chip Fair Lele, say that you watch Tim and she'll give you a big discount. What is the vegetarian festival about? Why do you have a vegetarian festival? Because I think I could ask 10 people, they all have different answer. So what do you think the vegetarian festival is about?
For me, it's like a belief.
Belief, yeah.
Yeah, for Chinese temple, for Chinese people, when they do like this, about this year, maybe they say 99 years for do this. Yeah.
Oh, 99 years?
Yeah, 99 years.
So are you Thai Chinese? Do you have Chinese
but
relatives?
I'm Chinese, but I'm not in Chinese people in Phuket. But normally around people in Phuket, PHANG, they believe like this.
Because there's a lot of Chinese people,
more.
Chinese family.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but you didn't wear white. You didn't go out and throw firecrackers.
No.
So you don't like it?
No, I okay, but this year my mom come back from USA and she don't want to eat vegetarian. She want to eat something delicious, and we go eat outside, something like that. And okay, this year no.
Oh, okay.
But some year.
And your boy, a captain, does he?
No.
Does he like it?
Captain say no. I want to eat egg omelette. I cannot do.
Yeah, because the vegetarian festival, they don't eat meat. They don't drink alcohol. I saw a lot of people drinking alcohol.
That's why I just say it's belief for some people.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, now you're an international YouTube star. Thank you, Pla.
Thank you, ka.
Bye. She's got a customer. Okay. All right. So that's Pla, who owns Chip Fair Lele. And it is interesting if you do ask 10 people what the vegetarian festival is about. Look, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I don't have any video of it. I know Steve, he posted something last night as the procession went past. I was down in, there's Captain there. I was down, I stayed in one of my cottages because the noise at where I live, just unbelievable, impossible to sleep. And I've got a dog, Daisy, and she hates the firecrackers, so we went down. But the procession went past, I don't know, 5,000-6,000 people. Complete mayhem and noise. I mean, there's no way anybody could sleep through that. Antoine says Financial Times in the UK and the Netherlands. Jim says TikTok, interesting. Twitter, independent YouTubers. Now, Jim, you're the sort of person I'd really like to ask about that. TikTok has been, I suppose, pilloried, especially in the United States, as a spreader of fake news. I would say that there's fake news on every single social media platform. Twitter, now known as X, probably more so recently than other platforms. But any social media platform is a space where fake news can be disseminated. Good day, Tim, from the top of the mountain at Bathurst for the great race. I love the Bathurst race. That's from Rachel Masters. Used to be called the Hardy Ferodo. I think it's 1,000 kilometres they travel. The Bathurst 1000, I think it's called these days. It used to be always a great race between two car makers in Australia, Ford and Holden, known as General Motors in other parts of the world. And it was some great characters, great personalities, and great use of cameras, very revolutionary in its day. Most of you don't care, so I'll go on. But good luck, Rachel. Hope you have a good day. Richard Evans, nothing to do with Rupert Murdoch. Yes, I also watch Joe Blogs. He's very good. I'm going to have to check out this Joe Blogs. I don't know who you're talking about. Joe Blogs. I will talk about Rupert Murdoch a little bit later. As an Australian, I apologise for foisting Rupert Murdoch on the English and the US citizens in particular. They've suffered some of the wrath of Rupert Murdoch and his, I think, extremely poor decisions in weaponising and perhaps over-monetising news so that it becomes a commodity rather than a responsibility. And we'll also talk about his succession. The Duran. Sid Jones, the Duran, is another news source I've not heard of. A lot of you are going to be telling me news sources I've never heard of. Tony Fossey says, hi, Tim. In Australia, we don't have a lot of choice, as you would know. All of them are either left or right. You're talking politically here. The ABC are the worst of them. I watch a lot of English YouTube news channels. And this, I suppose, is another one of the problems given the proliferation of media. In some ways, that's a good thing to have. More democracy in the media, more opportunity, more alternatives to find and read about news, more opinions. In a way, that's a good way, but it's also coloured by people's different opinions. And whilst news is disseminated by humans, noisy people in the background there, it will have opinions. It will be weighted. It's very difficult for a human to be tapping out a story they don't feel comfortable with and not put their own personal slant. I've got a coffee sitting here, so I'm going to have a bit of a sip of that. Alpha Bravo says we can imagine BBC, CNN and you, says Pharang Puppy. Well, my news that I'm providing is very limited in that I'm pretty much only talking about Thailand. So I'm not talking about world news. I've thought about doing that, but I've got my little corner in the world. I suppose that's what I'm doing. Khmer Times and independent YouTube news aggregators. This is Wal Sakaluk. Maybe you live in Cambodia, reading the Khmer Times. I have interviewed the editor of the Khmer Times in Cambodia. A very interesting history of that particular platform. Jan De Vries, good morning from Kelang in Taiwan. Jan says, or Jan or Yan, I don't know if you're a man or a lady. Says BBC, CNN, Deutsche Welle, and many international and local news channels here. That's the other thing. Do you read 20 news sources or do you just read one or two? I think these days, people who are honest about news and taking news in read multiple news sources, because I think it's very difficult to get a true picture of what's going on from just one or two news sources. So I read probably 20 to 30 different news sources every day. I'm a bit of a news junkie, a bit of a news whore. I do enjoy the news, the cut and thrust of the news, its immediacy, and of course social media has made it more immediate than it was in the past. So yeah, I do enjoy it. Benny Johnson is the best YouTube news. I'm going to have to write all these down. Joe Blogs, Benny Johnson, I've not heard of him. In the US, I use local city stations as not so biased. I ignore CNN and Fox Cable as both spin the news. Internationally, I go to the BBC, Al Jazeera and Associated Press, or AP. That's actually quite a good varied selection. So thank you very much for that input. Daryl McGee, thank you very much for your support of the program, for your kind and generous support. In 2 weeks, says Daryl, I'll be back, Sissiket, and getting my world news from the BBC World. They have no idea. There you go. I like his shirt though. Getting my world news from the BBC World on my shortwave radio. Yes, it's still used in parts of the world. But that's very interesting. So tuning into your shortwave, adjusting your antenna, and picking up the BBC World Service. Do they still do that? I would have thought it's online these days. Jim Schumann says, the Christian Science Monitor. I think you're joking. I've read that several times too. Peter Nesden, good morning from Shanghai. Whatever you are all watching, I bet it's biased. It's less biased than CCTV, which is the Chinese government's TV outlet. Interesting comment. Okay, so I think we're sort of up to date from a lot of people and their news choices. I'm very happy to hear anybody else. Tattoo Alex, I watch Tim Newton for my news. I'm sorry, I'm only talking about what's happening here in Thailand. Maybe I should do a quick international summary every day. Here's one. Fun Size Media. I like France 24 myself. Oui. Yeah, France 24. I've used that before. I've filed for them before. I use AP, that's Associated Press, NPR, and a local station here in the US. This is from Wayne Willis. Okay, so I just want to make sure I don't miss any super chats. I hate missing super chats. I feel very bad. How's your dating with girls? I have no idea what you're talking about, Trepid. How's your dating? We're not talking about dating, are we? ABC in Australia and your YouTube channel for updates of Phuket and Thailand from Neil Church. Does anybody watch news on Thai TV? Interesting question. Tim, I believe the BBC World Service to be the gold standard in news, says Dave. Always like the information you provide about Thailand. Thanks, Jesse. R. Dewsbury, Daily Mail, FT, Financial Times, and X. Oh, gee. Okay, interesting choices. Got to make sure I don't opine about people's choices, but interesting choices. 2 of them anyway. Daryl McGee. Comment. It's just nice to get away from the screen sometimes and go old school for the news. Skidmark says, my wife and the neighbours. Also interesting. Comment. Sorry, Tim, but you decided to do your show in a cafe, so you should expect a bit of noise. I'm not complaining. It's just happening. Maybe you should be thankful the cafe isn't very busy people-wise. Colin, I'm happy for the noise. I do it here because of the noise. I do it here because of the ambience, and I'm just relating to it. I'm just noticing it. I'm easily distracted. Yeah, just sort of get over it. Okay, so just click on that. And I like Truth Social as it's not censored like Facebook and the like. Okay, so Richard, that's an interesting comment. Truth Social, which I think is owned by the Trump organisation, obviously has a strong link to the political ambitions of Donald Trump. It's not doing particularly well from a financial point of view, but it has got a colliery of adherents, people that like using it. I suppose people that like to hear what the former president has to say. The problem is censorship, and I'll get onto the issue of censorship a little bit later. But you can't get onto any platform and just say drivel and rubbish. There still has to be a responsibility for what you say. And there is still a truth. And not your version of the truth, there is an objective truth to any particular news story. There's X number of victims, and the fire came from this direction, and there were this number of floors in the building that fell over. I mean, there are objective, readable, measurable things that you need to report in a proper news story. Beyond that, you're starting to sort of swing the canvas. And I think that's the problem with a lot of social media. Well, we've never had more news available to us than we do today. Now, 50 years ago, I was a little bit younger. Surprise, surprise. And I used to come home from school. I wasn't particularly interested in the news. And my mother would be preparing the dinner, feeding the cats. So we'd help out in the garden for a few hours, or I'd go play with my mates. Father had come home, the newspaper under his arm. He'd sit down and he'd have a bit of a read of the newspaper. Usually the Herald Sun, it was back in, I think it's still called the Herald Sun in Melbourne. We had the Age as well. I think it's still called the Age. And he'd read it for about 10 minutes, and my mother and father would be going "Rah, rah, rah, rah," about the news. And then the newspaper would be closed, dinner would come out, and the newspaper would go into a pile and be used the next day to wrap up all the kitchen scraps and be thrown in the rubbish, and that's the news. And of course you had this 24-hour news cycle. We had on TV, we had the nightly news on all the major stations at 6:30 or 7 p.m. And we'd watch that news, we'd consume it, and then we'd think about it, and then there'd be a 24-hour news cycle and we'd do it all again. A bit of a respite on the weekend. Perhaps my father wouldn't buy the newspaper, so there'd be a couple of days when something big happening we wouldn't know about, and we'd hear about it back on Monday. That was sort of the news back in those days. Now, you can sit on your phone or your computer all day and be bombarded by any amount of news, some of it accurate, some of it less accurate. And the problem is a lot of people are not going to be able to sift out the accurate from the less accurate. They're not going to be able to sift out the truth from the fake news. And this is the problem. Now, education has got a lot to do with this, and people's political bias has got a lot to do with this. Because what's happening is people start to choose their news source based on their political affiliations. I mean, this is absurd. So something is only true if a news source that bends your way politically has published it. Well, that's not news, that's simply opinion. Imagine the problem also these days of going down to a bar. Now, 50 years ago, if somebody in the bar, pub, if you like, said, I think the Prime Minister's blah, 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 and he's been sleeping with blah, 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 blah. And people at the bar would go, oh, mate, that's shocking. Oh, dreadful. Really? How do you know that? Oh, a friend told me. And then you'd all be going, drinking and discussing it for half an hour. Then you'd sort of go home and it'd be forgotten, pretty much. You got one person talking gibberish and rubbish in a drunken stupor to another 10 people who all get sort of horrified and offended for half an hour, and it's all forgotten. These days, when that person is venting a particular political opinion or some fake news, and there's been so much of it, for example, in the last couple of hurricanes, people spreading. I've seen so much media of tornadoes and hurricanes that are not happening in Florida. They're posted saying this is hurricane, what was it called, Helen or something? Helena. But they were from things happening in Taiwan 20 years ago. So people posting things, oh, it's dreadful, the whole place is sunken into the sea, showing pictures of tidal waves in Japan, Hurricane Helena. This is just absurd. And the problem is these loudmouths, these people who are posting this information, aren't just voicing it to a couple of 10 drunks in a pub. They're voicing it to hundreds of thousands, millions of people. These things, the more absurd they are, the more likely they are to go viral. And so this is a problem with social media. Now, social media wasn't meant to do this. It was meant to democratize information. It was meant to provide an opportunity for people to share information. But of course, it's also sharing poor information, bad information, and fake information. So I'm saying enough. I'm now going to go to your comments after having a little sip. Okay, the lesson says Euromotif, trust, but verify. So there is some interesting posts about this. The BBC have got a thing called the Sift system, which I'm going to share with you now. This is the Sift, S-I-F-T system. And it says, being online, where both news cycles and content are especially fast-paced and often emotive, can put us in a particularly urgent mindset. Take a moment to stop and reflect. Just stop. So you're going through all your news and the stuff's popping up on your phone and you see a headline, oh, I've got to share this with everybody, and you just press the share button. It's so easy to do. And by pressing that share button, it can go out to just literally millions of people. Whether it's right or wrong, whether it's accurate or not accurate. So stop. Turn on your brain before you do anything. And so you got SIFT, S is stop, I is for investigate the source. Ask the question, who created this post? Get off platform and do a web search. Now, some information was shared with me a couple of weeks ago. I'm trying to think what the story was. But when they told me, I sort of went, really? Oh, Elon Musk has bought the Ford Motor Company. At the time I thought, I was sort of pretty sure if an entrepreneur had bought, who owns an electric car company, amongst other things, had bought the Ford Motor Company, I would have heard something about that. Well, I went and checked, and he hadn't bought the Ford Motor Company, but this person had decided that that's what the truth was and was going and telling his friends and sharing the news from news sources that were not reliable. So as soon as I hear something that's a bit, really? That just doesn't sound quite right, I'll jump onto Google and I'll say, I'll type in the main keywords and I'll find out where that source was, or I'll type in the actual source of the news, and if I've never heard of them before, and see, who pays the bills, who funds that news source, where is it shared, how is it shared. So yeah, the question that is suggested here is under I, investigate. Who created the post? Get off platform and do a web search. Who created that particular story? So if the creator is a media outlet, and they're reputable, are they reputable and respected with a recognised commitment to verified independent journalism? Well, you're sort of going to have to make the decision about that. If it's an individual, what expertise do they have in the subject? What financial ties, political leanings, or personal biases may be at play? All those things are important. If it's an organisation or a business, what's their purpose? What do they advocate for or sell? Where does their funding come from? What political leanings have they shown? So this is a lot of questions you probably need to ask, maybe for just a simple news story. But if you are going to verify in 2024 about your news sources, you just need to dig a little bit deeper than you used to in the past, because it is harder to trust than it was in the past. And the next one, SIF, so we're up to F. F is for find better coverage. If from the previous step you'll find that you still have questions about the source, the credibility, now's the time to dig a little further. What you're looking for is whether a more trustworthy source, like a reputable news outlet or fact-checking service, has reported and verified the same claim. So if the story sounds a little bit dodgy, just put in the keywords into Google and see if there are other news sources, more reputable news sources, reporting the same thing. To Gola or jailer, Gola, I call you Gola because you spelled G-A-O-L-E-R. Gayola. I don't know, you might have to tell me because I don't want to get your name wrong. But thank you very, very much for your kind contribution. I'm trying to sort of, when I read these names, I'm thinking, should I be saying it this way or that way? It's not G-O. So Gayola, I'm going to call you. Tell me if I'm wrong. But thank you very much for your kind generosity. Okay, so find better coverage. If you are interested in the story, go to a reputable news source. So SIFT, Sift. What's the T? T is for trace the claim to its original content. And even if you see that a claim's been reported by a credible media outlet, for example, it may not be the original reporting. They may have gotten that claim from another outlet. Ideally, the original source should be linked, so always go there. Now, there are a lot of news aggregators these days. I suppose in general terms, you'd call me a news aggregator. I always quote where I get my news from. And often, if you are reading from an aggregated source, they should list the source. Now, there's one news aggregator in Thailand that doesn't list its sources, which is extremely irresponsible, but it's a decision they've made because they don't want people to click away from their website. Okay, I get it. But it's you're basically lying to your readers. So if you are reading a source and there is a link to another source, go to that original source because that's where the original information came from before it was perhaps twisted around in the publication you're reading. And this is, I suppose, what I was alluding to before. Today, anyone can make a claim on social media and anyone can be the person whose resharing of that claim is the one who makes it go viral. That means it's the responsibility of each one of us to make sure that what we're posting, liking and sharing is first and foremost actually true. Now, we're living in this world of social media and information going viral at the click of a button. And because of that, we've all got to consume our news differently than we did 10, 20 years ago. We have to read much more carefully, slowly, deliberately. We have to take much more care in what we're reading. And it is very easy for those people that are sort of politically motivated to end up just reading from a little echo chamber that's just sharing the same gibberish, the same sort of bias in the news. And that's, you're not being honest to yourself by doing that. So the best thing you can do these days is, you don't just read like my father, the Herald Sun, for 20 minutes, then close it up and put it away. These days, it's your responsibility to go out and read much wider than you used to. Also, check the sources. Do that Sift, S-I-F-T, and to find out where the original story came from. It does take extra effort, but that's your responsibility as a person living in this time of aggregators and the time of anybody can share news and information. It's your responsibility to make sure that you are consuming something that is as accurate as it can be. And before you press that share button, make sure that you are sharing something that has been responsibly found. What on earth are they doing? Strange people. Okay, so that's that. Let's have a talk about brands that are trustworthy. Now, some people might say, oh, this is just your opinion. And to a degree it is. But there are objective ways that you can read what is reliable news. Now, from time to time, there will be news platforms that post something that you may not disagree with. The news falls in such a way that it's negative against your political values, for example. So it's very easy these days to throw out that term, fake news. Oh, it's just lies. Oh, they're biased. But there are measurably news organisations in the world that are less biased and much more responsible and much more broadly funded to provide the sort of quality journalism that you deserve. So let's go to some of these. Now, I've got my list I'm going to share with you. And the list I'm about to read now was compiled by Forbes. Now, Forbes themselves, they're quite a reliable news source. And they've decided to share their list of what they're calling 10 journalism brands where you find real facts rather than alternative facts. I want to get into alternative media, independent media, in just a moment, because that has just got a whole new set of problems. Anyway, to the Forbes list, the New York Times, number 1. Number 2, the Wall Street Journal. I'm sure you've all got your opinions on some of these. And number 3, the WAPO, the Washington Post. Number 4, the BBC. 5, the Economist. Now, there is obviously a bit of a US skew in this particular list. My list is a little bit more international. Now, let's go on. Number 6, the New Yorker. Got a lot of interesting opinions in that piece. Number 7, Associated Press, AP, Reuters or Bloomberg. Number 8, Foreign Affairs. Again, very US-centric, as is number 9, The Atlantic. And number 10, Politico, which, of course, is also fairly US-based. But they're a Forbes list of 10 reliable news sources. So I've compiled my own. Do you want to hear them? Probably don't. I'm going to tell you anyway. So these are publications I think you're going to find news that's been properly sourced by people who are paid and trained journalists. Now, even these news organisations will occasionally get something wrong. It just so happens in this fast-paced news world these days that even the best journalists see something happening, they jump on, they file the story. The editor at the other end, who really doesn't know, has to make a decision very quickly. Do I publish this? And some news stories, they change over time. Now, there was 4 people confirmed dead, then there was 10 people confirmed dead, then an hour later it's 15 people confirmed dead. So news often can change and evolve very, very quickly. And we're not just reading it in a 24-hour news cycle anymore, we're reading it in like almost immediate news cycle where it can change very, very quickly. Okay, here are my top 10 news sources. The BBC. It is a bit of a gold standard, especially if you're in the West. People who read the news carefully and well in usually a well-educated British accent. It's hard to beat the BBC for just hard, clean, world, and I'm talking about world news in particular with the BBC. Number 2, Euronews. Obviously, it's talking about news from the European countries, and as a sort of obviously a geographical and trade block, they're very, very, very important part of the world to understand. So Euronews is also a great news source. CNN. Now, I know that's controversial for some people, and they have been accused in the past for some of their left-wing bias with domestic reporting in the United States. What I really like about CNN is their world news service. I think that's what made them famous in the first place, and I find CNN's international news coverage very good. Now, given some of the latest conflicts, they have appeared to sort of take sides a little bit, but I think generally they're reporting about even some of these sensitive, like the Middle East war or the war between Ukraine and Russia. I think it's been fairly good and broad. Deutsche Welle have also filed for Deutsche Welle in the past, based in Germany, basically the sort of German version of the BBC. I enjoy the presentation and the editorial standards of Deutsche Welle. Then you've got Reuters and Associated Press, both cover world news and have websites, and they sell their news to publications around the world. So a lot of what you might read on the BBC or on CNN or even on Fox News has been sourced from, say, Reuters. Same with Associated Press, AP. If you see that AP, the Reuters and Associated Press often sourced by other news organisations around the world. Locally, it's impossible to go past the Bangkok Post. Now, they do have their political leanings, they've had some of their problems in the past, but just the sheer volume of news that they publish about things happening locally, very hard to go past the Bangkok Post, who generally, I think, do a fairly good job, of course, in English. When it comes to Asia, I also think there's another two very good news sources, Channel News Asia and Straits Times, both out of Singapore, both which, when it comes to Singaporean news, often paint things with a nice shade of, of rose pink. So I tend to just dismiss their reporting of Singapore news. But when it comes to coverage of other news happening around Asia and the rest of the world, I think Channel News Asia and Straits Times do a very, very good job in English. And finally, and also I suppose controversially, I enjoy reading the news from the New York Times. Their standard of journalism is very high. Sometimes it's peppered with a bit of bias, but again, if you read it accordingly, and you read through some of the writers' peccadillos, you can come up with some really good stories. So New York Times I certainly rate. Okay, so look, they're the top 10 from Forbes, my top 10. And I would go to probably another 20 or 30 news sources on a daily basis, sometimes digging down into where a particular story came from and finding news sources I'd never heard of before. Which brings me to the Middle... sorry, I just saw the Middle East popping out of the corner of my eye, and we do need to talk about the coverage of that conflict as well. But people who say, I don't trust MSM, I don't trust mainstream media anymore. And most of what I just read out there were mainstream media sources. So if you don't trust the mainstream media, who do you trust? Oh, I trust an independent news source on YouTube. Really? So what's their training? Where do they get their news? Do they go to Gaza? Do they go to Tel Aviv? Do they go to Kiev? Do they go to Washington? Or are they just sitting in their room aggregating news, this is what I do, and just disseminating it? Now, I'm always very careful about the sort of news that I disseminate. I'm careful about what I'm reading. From time to time, I'll give a bit of a wink if I think it's a bit biased. Sometimes people disagree with the news stories that I've published. I always say to them, okay, there's one guy, Marty Rowlandson, I think. Anytime I publish any news about statistics about tourism arrivals, foreign arrivals in Thailand, he says, oh, just another made-up number from the TAT. So, well, the TAT don't actually publish, they publish them, but they don't collate the information from the immigration department. They're just, the immigration department are counting the people coming in. They collate that information and they pass it on to various news sources. So I say to him, okay, you don't trust the number. Give us the number. If you think that number's wrong, you give us the number. And I say that to other people. If you don't like the numbers or the news that's being published, show me your source and what you think the correct story is. Otherwise, you're just sharing an opinion. And this is the problem with a lot of independent media, is it's not news, it's just sharing opinions. So for people that say, oh, I get all my news from Newsmax, well, I'm sorry, they don't even come close to being understood and recognised as a news source. They might say they are, they might put the word news in their headline, but they're not news disseminators. They're political propaganda. And there's a big difference between news and propaganda. Now, I would have thought we sort of learnt our lessons back in the Second World War, when propaganda became something that was used as a weapon against its communities. And these days, it's so much easier to spread that propaganda, and that's broadly known by a lot of clever people who use social media and its reach and its amplification to spread information and to spread misinformation. Now, let's talk about the Murdochs briefly. Now, for whatever reason, Rupert Murdoch comes from a long tradition back in Australia of news holdings and news media. His father, Sir Keith Murdoch, owned some publications, set up those publications in the sort of first half of the 20th century. And then you got Rupert Murdoch, who inherited that empire and spread it overseas to the UK and to the US. Now, probably the most prominent thing that happened to the news media was when Rupert Murdoch engaged a man called Roger Ailes. Very clever marketing person, wretched person in reality. And I think there's been plenty of documentation about his particular behaviour towards staff and some of his business practices. But he saw the opportunity to weaponise reporting by having the news shared in such a way that it had a political slant to one side rather than another. And so by doing so, they'd be able to corner a particular segment of the market, a particular niche. That particular niche is sort of the right side or the conservative side of United States politics. Now, what he did isn't necessarily illegal. I would say it's a very poor moral decision to make from a journalist's point of view by using a news source to spread propaganda. But that's sort of what happened. And they were able to use the strength and the power of that side of politics and the strength and the value of reporting and the use of blonde ladies with long legs, usually only blonde ladies with long legs, especially in the early days. There's a whole story behind that as well, to spread information that they labelled as news. It was fair and balanced. That was their byline. It wasn't fair and balanced. It was bias. And they did it with a wink and a nod. They knew exactly what they were doing. And from a financial point of view, it was very, very successful. And to this day has been very, very successful, despite the fact that they've lost numerous court cases and had to pay out, notably nearly $1 billion in recent years for some of their political bias, certainly over their reporting of the 2020 presidential election and its outcome. So this is all well documented and understood. Now, I don't include any Murdoch publications or the Washington Post. Rupert Murdoch also does own some very fine newspapers still, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see what's going to happen with the Murdoch empire. He's now 92, 94, just recently married, I think, to his fifth wife. Good luck, Rupert Murdoch. I interviewed his sister quite a few years ago, Elizabeth Murdoch, at Cruden Farm in Frankston North. She was a lovely, lovely lady, and she spent a lot of her time, rather than her brother building up a news and media empire, she spent her time just giving to the local community and passing her side of the Murdoch inheritance to the betterment of her community. Well loved, well remembered Elizabeth Murdoch. There's now a debate what's going to happen to the Murdoch empire, because the 4 children who were given some 20 years ago an equal share of the Murdoch empire when Rupert eventually died. The problem is that 3 of those children are probably a little bit more left-leaning, and one, that's Lachlan Murdoch. Do you want to come and say hello?
Hello.
So what's on your mind today? What are you doing? Did you throw firecrackers last night?
No.
You didn't?
No, my family don't.
You don't like that. So what did you do? Did you go to bed?
Yes, I go to bed. I don't do something. A little bit lazy.
You're a little bit lazy. Are you helping Mum with the shop today?
A little bit, not a lot.
No, not much.
Yes.
Okay, when do you go back to school?
24.
The 24th.
This month.
Well, poor Mum has to put up with you for another 2 weeks. Okay, oh, he's gone. That's Captain. So there you go. So don't take the blame for Murdoch, Tim. He left Oz years ago. Yeah. I do feel a bit of a responsibility. Anytime somebody brings up Rupert Murdoch, I go, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm a fellow Australian. He did get American citizenship. I recognise that, but he did come from Australia. What was I talking about? I've been sort of sidetracked. Anyway, yes, the 4 children. So they're now Rupert and his son Lachlan Murdoch. I've interviewed Lachlan in the past, sort of knew him almost socially about 30 years ago back in Australia. I do have some stories to tell one day. But Lachlan has now really sort of got into the business side of the media business, and has sort of politically moved slowly to the right side of politics. That's okay, he's allowed to make those decisions, except that he will be taking over the Murdoch empire. Now, what the court case is at the moment is they're trying to give the full responsibility of the Murdoch empire to Lachlan and take it away from his other 3 children. I don't think the court case was in Nevada. It's all been shrouded in secrecy. I think the result will come out in a couple of months, that they won't be able to change the original inheritance. And then what happens when Rupert Murdoch dies, well, we'll just have to wait and see. But, okay, let's go to your comments. I think I've been speaking enough. We've got another 10 minutes or so. Just rearrange things around here. Can I have a quick sip? I'm sure there's a few hateful things I'm going to have to wade through. Okay, so everybody's comments are valid. I'm cool about that, unless I see something that's just factually insane or wrong. And this is my platform, so I have to make that decision on this particular platform, just to be clear. Globe bug, one of the best and worst news is YouTube. You get these clowns who have just landed in Thailand 5 minutes ago, who doing videos on the top 10 best restaurants, best hotels, beaches, bars. Instant experts, sure. I agree. It is a bit of an issue, but again, it's up to you to sort of go, oh, hang on, they've only been posting in Thailand for 2 weeks. Perhaps I'll go and find some people who have been in Thailand a little bit longer. Antoine, question, Tim, what are the most reliable Thai news sources? Well, as I said, I think the Bangkok Post, very hard to go past. I understand that there is a certain amount of bias in some of their news, but it's a matter of knowing what that bias is and reading through that, because otherwise they are a very, in quantity and quality, they stand out against all the other news sources in Thailand by far. In the English language, of course, I'm saying. Dodgy claims on TV, says Trent Brown. Must be a new thing, hey? Tim Shaw. Great seeing you around here, champion. Tim Shaw. Is Tim in the thing? Okay. Just scrolling back a bit. Sorry, I haven't caught up with some of your comments. Mr. Ben's World, I've had to declare a moratorium on Facebook until the election in America is in the rear-view mirror. The posts I've recently seen have been bonkers and conspiracy-driven. There is a body of work that would seem to suggest that both the Brexit vote and the outcome of the 2016 presidential election in the United States were gamed by particularly Facebook to such an extent that they actually decided the outcomes of the votes. Now, there's been a number of documentaries. I suppose most notable would be a Netflix documentary. I can't even remember the name of it, but it was about an organisation called Cambridge Analytica. And they've admitted to the fact that they were hired by one side of the Brexit vote and one of the contenders of the US presidential election to run basically a completely vacuous campaign of lies to sway people. And it worked. Now, Facebook's really had to change things since then, but the more, of course, these social media platforms try and rein in the bias, the more there are ways of people to get around those constraints. So it continues to be a big problem, and there's no doubt there is still a lot of disinformation and lies that are being disseminated on both sides of the political spectrum on platforms like Facebook and TikTok. I don't know why TikTok is so demonised. They're all as bad as each other. Bill G, it's amazing how well you can know a person's political and social standings based on what news and information sources they use. FJ reminds me, it's not Helena, try Helene. So I'm sorry if I got that wrong. Yeah, my father, and even me, we never used to talk about politics with our friends. Or if we did, we'd talk in general terms. I don't think we'd ever go outwardly declaring our political allegiances. I think that might be changing in Australia a bit these days. But in polite conversation, my father never would have declared his political leanings with his friends. I think that's a nice sort of social nicety that's been dispelled these days. Politics is something that rips families apart. Bewildering to me. Euro Motif says, I analyse diverse sources, data, papers and insights. Trust but verify, question everything, and keep a diverse info diet for sharp understanding. A diverse info diet, I think that's the best words you've got in that message there. Euro Motif, thank you very much. I would concur. We should digest a diverse information diet. Mr. Ben's World, I have to declare sorry, I've done that one. Prospero, comment. I believe you're right, Tim. The trick these days is developing the ability to differentiate between opinion pieces disguised as news and truly objectively reported news. Again, if you have an independent news source that you think is better than the mainstream media, then please share it with me. I'm very happy to have a look at it and to see what you have to say about it. If I want to find out what's happening in the world, I'll go straight to the mainstream media because they've got the resources. They've got, in most cases, a responsible attitude, and they've got journalists, some with their own biases or not, but it's up to us to understand what they are, out there, on site, actually reporting the story. These independent news sources, in most cases, don't have those sort of resources. So it just discounts them from being reliable or stable from the get-go. Globe bug, the problem with a lot of the news now is some is slanted with some bias, and if you watch online only, Google starts only sending you more news slanted one way, not both points of view. Okay, Glowbug, thanks for that. I get what you're saying. I think it's not so much Google that's that problem, although I haven't noticed it in my own news feed from Google, by the way, because I do use Google as a source for my news, well, of course. But certainly with social media on a platform, if you start watching one or two stories that are slanted one way or other politically, then you just seem to be getting more of that same coloured opinion being sent your way. I think it's more of a social media platform problem than a Google problem. That's just my point of view, but thank you for sharing that. I watched Reuters. It's good, non-opinionated news. Uncle Bob L. Yeah, look, I think things like Reuters, Associated Press are pretty much as good as we have at the moment. It's hard to go past them. Daryl McGee says, comment, a lot of clickbait news out there to get the views. Sure, a lot of these news organisations are businesses. And when you start to have accountants running these organisations rather than hard-headed news journalists, you're going to get a slant towards making more money from the news, and that's sort of understandable. They get shareholders, and the shareholders want a return. It's like the airlines. They used to be run by aviators, by pilots, by people that loved flying. And then they got aggregated and they got run by accountants. And so the seats got smaller and they were closer together and the airfare started dropping and the service started dropping. There was this race to the bottom. Flying on planes these days isn't nearly as fun as it used to be. It used to be something you looked forward to. Now it's something I just hate. I'm always thinking about where am I going? Where am I going? The actual getting there is not enjoyable anymore because these airlines are being run by accountants. And a lot of these news organisations are being run by accountants these days as well. And so clickbait becomes part of their marketing strategy. And so again, it's up to us to educate ourselves to read through the clickbait. I mean, when I do my thumbnail each day, I have to work out exactly how honest I'm going to be, well, this is what's going to be in the video you're about to watch, against doing a headline that's going to make people go, ooh, I'd like to read that. Has to be a bit of both, doesn't it? But again, people hopefully after a time will understand my slant and what I mean when I give a bit of a wink and a nod. And that's all. That's part of, trusting a news source, is getting used to the people reading it and getting to trust the people who are delivering the news. So you're right, Daryl. There is a lot of clickbait there. Again, we just need to be educated about the way we read it. Wilco says his news sources are Max Headroom, it's a blast from the past, Spitting Image, even more of a blast from the past, and Rubbery Figures. Well, of course, they were sort of spoofing the news in their day. Not so much Max Headroom, but Spitting Image and Rubbery Figures were sort of social commentary. And that's an important part of news as well. And things like SNL. I mean, obviously they have a particular political leaning, but they're out there to mock the absurd. And it's that sort of political satire that I think is also part of the way that news should be shared as well. It sort of puts it into perspective in some cases. KJ, I generally just stop at the first step of Sift, which is stop. I don't feel the need to spread news. Most times just not invested enough to investigate, only so much hours in a day. A fair point, KJ. We only have X amount of time. I mean, sort of partly news is my life and my profession. So I do like to immerse myself in the news. I do like the cut and thrust of a good headline. And I do like to find out who wrote it. I have got writers I like, writers I don't like. And I'll finish this whole conversation talking about AI. Did you meet him in person? Who are we talking about? We're talking about Lachlan Murdoch. Yes, I knew Lachlan almost socially, such that I met him quite a few times at social occasions. Here's a good one. How about Russell Brand, says Richard Woolley. Well, Russell isn't a news person. He's got an opinion. Now, his opinion is certainly on one side of the political spectrum. And it's well communicated in a very Russell Brand way, but he's not a news person. I mean, let's not try and sort of... These people like Alex Jones, Rush Limbaugh in their day, these are entertainers. These are not people that you get news. These are just pure entertainment and propaganda merchants, in many cases paid by different people to share different opinions. But they've got nothing to do with news. Let's just look at people like Russell Brand as the entertainers that they are. Enjoy them for what they are. Disagree with them, have an argument if that makes you feel good, but they're just entertainers. And he's a very good one. People read first. People read what fits their narrative, makes them comfortable, says Evil Twin. That's the problem. There's so many sources out there that you can just get into your corner of the political spectrum and just stay in there and share your views with other people in there and keep on reading sources where there's a whole different world of news outside those echo chambers that would make you more educated and give you a more balanced opinion. But people just don't want to go there. Maybe they think it will make them feel uncomfortable. I don't know. David Street says, mostly get Thai news from wife, who gets it from radio and group chats online. Group chats online, forums generally in Thailand, are not a place I would get my news. I think... Anyway, then I guess get news from internet and Facebook gossip, which... see, Facebook gossip. That's not news. That is, as you say, it's gossip. Which interested if in Like a Death I must check out. Okay, so David, yeah, you're sort of just passive news intake, and you're probably getting a version of the news which is sifted by your wife and social media forums. Fun Size Media, my Thai girlfriend, does not care or follow the news. I don't blame her. This is Lars, says, what about Tiger News? I think you're talking about THAIGER, the organisation I was the founder back in 2016 in September, which I recently sold out all my shares about 2 months ago. I've got nothing to do with Tiger whatsoever. Tiger News, they are aggregators. These days they use mostly AI to write the news, and then sometimes, not always, it is checked by an editor. It's not a news source, it's an aggregator, and it's designed purely for financial gain rather than spreading information and news. But that's the business model that they run these days. They're obviously happy with that. They're obviously happy with the results, and I wish them good luck. If Forbes is reliable, pigs can fly. LMAO, says Steve J. Well, I didn't say that they're reliable. I said that they shared a particular list of the 10 most reliable sources. They didn't include themselves on the list, sir. So I'm not saying they're reliable. They just went so far as to share a list. Here we are. American Aviator says Bill O'Reilly. Well, Bill O'Reilly doesn't share the news. Once again, Bill O'Reilly shares an opinion about the news. So he's not a news person at all. He's not even slightly a journalist. He's a commentator. He's an opinionator. And he used to, in his day at Fox News, do it very, very well. But you don't watch Bill O'Reilly to understand what's happening around the world. You watch Bill O'Reilly for his take on particular news items. Obviously, he's opinionated more for one side of the political spectrum in the United States than others. But Bill O'Reilly is not a news person. He's an opinion maker, like Alex Jones, like Rush Limbaugh, like Ben Shapiro. Oh my, Ben Shapiro. I have a connection with Ben Shapiro through a family member. What a knob. Question from KJ. Tim, what do you think is the future of these big news brands given the current media landscape? Alpha Bravo says Kimmel. I think it is a real problem. I mean, we can't go on in a situation we have at the moment with the political... Sorry, my brain stopped. A political machinery around the world being so affected and so polluted by social media. A lot of it, as we know, is fake social media. And at the moment, you've got sort of politics being so heavily driven by social media and some of these opinionators and their ability to spread, in some cases, disinformation. And we can't go on forever like this. At some stage, somebody's got to say, this is right, this is wrong, this is bullshit. I mean, there has to be an executioner. There has to be a judge. There has to be something or somebody. The worst way we can head down, the worst track we can head down, is saying we're going to let AI decide what things are fake and what is real. Because the whole AI sphere, for example, ChatGPT, is now getting polluted with a lot of this disinformation. So that we're expecting AI to try and sift through what is true and what is fake. AI is not helping us either. Now, I don't have a solution, but at some stage, we perhaps just all need to turn our phones off or just turn off social media so that our phones become something that we use to communicate with each other. Better still, just throw the phones away completely and we'll sit across a table and discuss things. I don't really have a good feeling about where we're headed with information. That it's infecting the political cycle so much around the world. And people say, oh, it's time these politicians, learned what the people want. Well, we do have elections, in some cases every 3 or 4 years. I think the ballot box is where we are meant to share our point of view. Not daily or hourly through social media, a lot of it, which is rubbish. I feel quite strongly about this. And so it's all very well to have free speech, but with free speech comes responsibility. Somewhere, somebody has to take the responsibility to decide what can be shared on these platforms. Now, I've only got my little platform. Thank you very much to my 37,000 subscribers, and I'm judge and jury here. If somebody posts something that I just think is clearly nonsense, it's just going to get deleted or I'll block them. I don't have time to sort of sift through the reason they felt they needed to post something like that. I don't care. So I am very responsible about the things that are said on this channel and posted in the comments section. That's all I have responsibility for. But the bigger picture is much more worrying. Who is going to decide? Now, I think the only way we can decide is by siding with the larger organisations that have got the resources and the properly qualified journalists to decide how to report the news. I'll stick with them. Thank you very much. Now, you might want to say, oh, that's the mainstream media. You can't trust them. Just because maybe in the past 1 or 2 outlets posted something that you disagreed with. I still think we've got a much better chance of survival through this maelstrom of opinion and sources and posts and scams if we side with the properly resourced and funded news organisations. That's my point of view. I'll finish with 3 or 4 more comments. There's plenty to say, I suppose. Okay, just zooming down here. Shane Weems. G'day again from our caravan on our last week of pet sitting in a ghost town in Western Australia. Sounds like you're having a good time. Next week we should be on the road home to Queensland via Kalgoorlie, then the air highway. Sharon Weems, you're having a great time. You're already in the outback of Australia. American Aviator says Tucker Carlson. Again, Tucker, he's just a gas bag. Now, I don't really care for what he says politically. He could say things for the left or the right of the American political sort of timeline. But he's just a windbag. He's not even particularly erudite, not particularly well educated. But again, he's not a news person. He's just an opinionator. So separate what he says from the actual news. He's just picking things in the news and amplifying them making them more absurd and then putting them out across his news sources. He's not a news person. Stop calling some of these independent news sources news. They're not. For Asian news, I miss Asia Week and the Far Eastern Economic Review. 40-year expat says, I agree, used to be very good. Tony Wright, Tim, for SEA, Southeast Asian Stuff, the Duran and Emerald Cosman, amongst others. Geez, there's some more ones I'm going to have to check out. Thank you very much for that. Okay. Warren Williams, American aviator. Tucker Carlson is great. So too Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly used to be a journalist. Actually, she used to be quite a good journalist. But she's now just a media commentator. She's not a journalist anymore. The stuff that she is talking about is just her opinion. Again, I don't really care if she's left or right. But all she's talking about is her opinion about particular news stories. So stop talking about people like Megyn Kelly being journalists or news disseminators. I mean, these are entertainers, highly paid entertainers in some cases. But they know precisely what they're doing. They're not passing on news, they're passing on their opinion about particular parts of the news. As long as the publication isn't heavy with opinion pieces, then I'll treat it as a news outlet. Too many publications nowadays are pure propaganda, says Chris. Yeah, it's pretty important. A news organisation can have an opinion. They have over the years. If it's on a website, if it's a published website, if they want to share an opinion, it needs to say opinion or editorial, or these are the views of this particular writer. Then you read it with that knowledge in mind. I don't mind publications having an editorial. From time to time, I've written plenty of editorials. I used to publish them on The Tiger when I was in control of the place. But I used to say opinion, made it very, very clear about what people are about to read is an opinion. I make it very, very clear on my program on a daily basis. If I'm going to share an opinion or my point of view, I'll make sure that you know it is my point of view. You can agree or disagree with me, that's fine. I know how to get very close to the real numbers, but the method isn't something to share here. Okay. ABC News says, this is Lars. Now, when you say ABC News, you could be talking about Australian Broadcasting Commission or the American Broadcasting Corporation. I don't know, but I think both are quite good news outlets. Fun Size Media, watch live streams with sound off, make your own opinion. There you go. KJ, very good business decisions though, and which the US is only starting to feel the true ramifications of. Yeah. News in the United States specifically, Australia to a lesser extent, the UK to even probably a lesser extent again, European news even lesser. But the United States news cycle has become extremely polarised, and it's been forced to do that, going all the way back to the 90s with Roger Ailes and his weaponising of news as a business and a propaganda outlet. And again, I'm not making comments about the right or the left. If he did the same thing for left-leaning news, I'd be saying exactly the same thing. It's very, very dangerous what Roger Ailes did. And the only reason I would have gone to his funeral is to make sure that he was dead, because he's probably, along with Rupert Murdoch, done more harm to stability and to weaponising the news cycle than anybody else in history. He will not be remembered well. The commodification of right-wing media made it impossible for folks from the same country to even have the same frame of reference for domestic affairs. You're absolutely right. The Thai Examiner, says Alpha Bravo. Oh, Thai Examiner. Look, they're an aggregator. They've got a bad case of... Look, they are an aggregator. They usually set on a story and they'll get all sorts of different publications and throw them all into the one piece, but it's usually badly edited. The layout of the page makes it very difficult to read. and increasingly it has become quite sensational. So I'm sorry I don't rate Thai Examiner at all. Tony Wright, Tim, great show today. Talking my favourite subject, being an ex-Fleet Street guy. The good old days. R. Dewsbury, Tim, what's your view on news sites paying the correct rights holders for pictures and videos? Well, I mean, it's a whole different question, but a good one, R. Dewsbury, about copyright. And there's parts of the copyright rule which talk about fair use. And a lot of people, I suppose myself included, use this fair use to be able to use the different sources and pictures which have been taken by people. And that's why I go out of my way to name the sources and I commentate about their news. I don't just read it verbatim. I'll read out a few lines and then I'll make comments about it. So making commentary about an image, making commentary about a news report, that is allowed under the fair use side or the fair use constraints in the copyright laws. But it is an ongoing problem. And it's becoming more acute as more people are sharing and disseminating that copyrighted material. Again, it's something that the social media platforms, including YouTube, are trying to really jump on. I get copyright strikes from time to time, even though I'm quite careful about the way that I use other people's content. And people use my content as well. And I have to click something on my YouTube page to allow other people to be able to use it without me making a copyright strike against them. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Tim. Opinions are not journalism or news. You're absolutely right. People who sit down and commentate a particular opinion, that's not news. It's just sharing an opinion. And it's great that we have the opportunity on social media and different broadcasters to do that. But it should have a great big fat opinion pasted on the TV under people like Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, Rush Limbaugh. Opinion. These are opinions. And consume them as such. They're not news. Tim leans left for sure, but I've enjoyed his commentary for years. Evil Twin. Yeah, I mean, I probably do lean left, but I try not to drag politics into my commentary much. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm human. It's going to seep through, and yeah, he's decided that I'm left-leaning, and I probably am. I mean, back in the days, I haven't voted for about 30 years, but I used to vote for the Labor Party in Australia. That's a long time ago. But I used to sort of agree with a lot of policies from the Liberal Party, which in Australia was the conservative side of politics. So I was sort of somewhere in the middle. And even these days, I think both sides of politics have got some good ideas. I don't lean one way or the other all the time. I'll sort of, vacillate backwards and forwards. Alan James, ABC Australia reporting of so-called war crimes is bloody disgusting. Okay, I'm unaware of that reporting. Tim's awesome, but definitely a lefty, says Richard Woolley. Yeah, well, okay, well, I'm not going to apologise for that. I just hope that what I'm saying is reasonably fair. And, I know a lot of the examples, the negative examples I've used today are probably towards the right side of politics. But that's where there has been this sort of intentional weaponising of the news. Now, it has been balanced by other news sources. They're not quite as prominent, but there has been plenty of news sources on the other side of politics which has sort of been forced over to the left by the fact that other news sources have been pushing to the right. So it's causing this vacuum in the middle of what you would call accuracy. So you've got this left and this right side of news and politics, which is just causing a schism in the United States and causing mass polarisation so that there really isn't any room in the left. I think this is the problem. I'd be very happy to see some of these balanced news sources are becoming more prominent in the years and pushing these other left and right leaning news sources, which are intentionally gaming the system, have them pushed out altogether. But an opinion based on facts and truth values more than an emotional opinion, especially in regard to politics, but an opinion based on facts and truth. But it's still an opinion. It's not news. So stop trying to connect the word opinion with the word news. They are two totally separate things. People can express an opinion, I'm all for that, but label it as an opinion. Don't try and tell somebody that what you're saying is a fact or that it's news. It's an opinion. Distrust, manipulation and biases, how can anything good come from that? It's why I go to Pokey the Clown for what's on the news scene. He's an absolute clown. Liberal is way left. Evil twin. Liberal is way left. In Australia, the Liberal Party is the conservative side of politics. I'm sorry, Evil twin, if you don't know that, but the Liberal Party in Australia is the side of politics that is considered the right side of the political spectrum. In Australia, the Labor Party is considered more on the left side of politics. So you're using liberal in an American sense. It's not the way the word is used in other parts of the world. Open your eyes, please. Okay, so what about when people use your news then edited out your source? Tavon Twinnant. Tim, what about when people use your news then edited out your source? I think that's shocking. You always must source where you got your news from. It's the only way we can trust what you're reading. So please, always, every publication, if you're going to republish something or you're going to use that information as a source, quote your source. Otherwise, it's not accurate. Okay, so let's leave it there. Thank you all very, very much. Been quite a lot to say, and I think the more we talk about this, the more it's going to sort of start getting a bit rancorous. But I've tried to, I suppose, just cover the issue of trusting news and my fears about where news is in the future. We're certainly in a very bad place at the moment, and I'm concerned that the more social media that we have, the more this problem is going to be exacerbated. And the greater responsibility we have for ourselves and our friends to make sure that what we're consuming has some sort of accurate base and is not coloured by an opinion. Okay, the newspapers used to have an op-ed page. Exactly. So opinions are fine, editorial is fine, but let's not confuse news with opinion. Okay, so thanks for watching. I've gas-bagged for nearly an hour and a half. I've got other things to do. So do you. Thank you very much to Chip Fairlele. Thanks to Pla, who appeared on the program. There she is. And Captain, there he is. No, it was something on the table. Great day here. Sun shining. Nothing to complain about. See you next time.